Given that Calgary's municipal election is just days away, this will be the last of our interviews with people seeking to represent the fine folks of Cowtown. Today's guest, Mike Jamieson from A Better Calgary Party, is running in Calgary's hotly contested Ward 12 and will face off against officially nominated candidates from most of the major municipal parties. This part of the city is a provincial and federal conservative stronghold, so providing that you are indeed the conservative candidate may prove crucial. And the election will be a strong indicator of whether this city's southeast is becoming more progressive, like some other parts of the city, or if Calgary is holding true to its blue roots. Mike joins me to state his case as to why he deserves your vote. Well, Mike Jamieson, thank you so much for joining me today. I really do appreciate it. I guess before we get into some of the questions here, if you could just sort of state a little bit about who you are, where you're from, who is Mike Jamieson?
Yeah, sure. So first of all, thanks for having me. This is exciting to be on your show here. And so who is Mike Jamieson? Well, I am a born and raised Calgarian. I've been in the I was in the oil and gas industry for over a decade, and a lot of remote type work. And I've been spent a lot of time in the oil sands in my early days. For the last almost decade, I have been working in commercial construction. So my day job, I guess you could say, is I've done a lot of senior project management, managed multi-million-dollar projects and budgets, and I like to think that I can bring expertise, in that field, to whatever I do, and in this case, is running for Ward 12 City Council.
Awesome. So where did this sort of interest in politics come? You have that private sector experience, but at what point were you like, you know what, I'm going to run for city council?
Well, unlike most people, I think that municipal politics is actually the closest to a community and how it affects our day to day life.
Right.
When you watch the news, it's always federal or provincial,
Mhm.
items. And a lot of people don't really know the provincial or sort of the municipal issues and,
Yeah.
and how much they affect you. And I've always followed municipal politics. I found it interesting. It's everything from our roads, fixing potholes, our infrastructure, our garbage collection, and what I like about municipal is I feel that you can get a lot more accomplished.
Right.
You can get a lot of wins, and,
Mhm.
and they're noticeable wins. And I think federally, there's a lot of things that happen that you don't see at your day to day life, but municipally you see everything. There's a crosswalk, say unmarked, you get it marked.
Mhm.
You can get these victories, and that's what I like about it.
And just generally, obviously that's why you got into municipal politics, but have you always been sort of interested in politics sort of on a meta level, taking that plunge
Mm.
often, whether it's you see something not quite right or you want to bring about some change? What was your motivation for sort of taking that plunge?
The motivation in this municipal election is really, I think that we need to really refocus Calgary's direction on more on municipal issues and less on some of the pet projects that Calgary has, and is spending money on.
Hmm.
I've said this to like almost 13,000 doors, door knocking is, I think most people are telling me that they want the money spent on really on our infrastructure, on our water mains, on our roads, our core services like police and fire, and less on exclusive, the term less on big blue rings,
Yeah.
less on federal issues like the $87 billion climate emergency that was declared on Gone Next first day in office, and
Mhm.
people just really want their tax dollars spent more on the things that get them to work and get their kids to school, and that's what I'm hearing a lot of, and that's going to be my focus.
One thing that's baffling here, Gondek is once again a front runner in the mayoral race, but she's also the least popular mayor in the history of the city. What is going on there that those two things can be true?
Vote splitting.
Yeah.
Okay, so particular conservative vote splitting. It's kind of plagued Alberta and Calgary for forever,
Hmm.
and it's very true this election. Yes, you have what the polls showed as the most unpopular mayor and council for that matter
Hmm.
last year, and you have a potential victory for Gondek again. And yeah, it's a lot of people ask me, well, how could that happen? Well, because on the so Gondek is running on the left, and so on the center or center right, you have uh, Davison, you have Sharp, you have Farkas, and and then Brian Thiessen is somewhere kind of in the middle there. Um, well, when you add all of those votes up from all those people, and you've got a bunch of other candidates, for mayor too
Yeah.
that I'm not even mentioning, but I'm just talking about the front runners right now. Um, Gondak has the potential to get more votes than any one of those. You know, um,
Right.
and that's how she gets reelected. And it's also who shows up to vote. Um, a lot of people don't know this, but municipal politics has the lowest voter turnout.
Yeah.
But it affects our day to day life the most.
Hmm.
And so, I would say that if Gondak is successful to get elected, I predict it's two reasons: one, vote splitting, and two, her people showed up more than the other people.
So you kind of mentioned that this was one of the least popular city councils, sort of in the history of this city. That's a council you're effectively looking to join or replace. Is that daunting, or is it sort of a you can only go up from here type situation?
Absolutely, I
Yeah.
think the bar is fairly low right now, and I think that there's a lot of room for improvement. And the only way to do that is to get new people in with new skills.
Right.
I always think that the best person, the most skilled person, should get any job. It doesn't matter the color of their skin. It doesn't matter, who they love. It doesn't matter where they're from. It's are you qualified and do you have the skills that are going to best serve? I live in Ward 12, and
Yeah.
and I want that for myself. And so I think that at the end of the day, this election, I think people are going to start thinking, if we want to change course a little bit, you know, then it's really important that we get the people with the skills to do it.
Yeah.
And I think that's where, I would come in as a new voice, somebody that has a construction background. And the thing about the city of Calgary is involved in a lot of construction projects. We
Yeah.
spend a lot of money on infrastructure. And so at least we can have one person, me,
Yeah.
on council for Ward 12 that is a subject matter expert in that.
Awesome. One of the things I found on your website that I found interesting is this mentality that Mike understands that you are the employer, not the employee. It's an attitude that politicians may have sort of forgotten, particularly on the city council. I think that's why there is such a disconnect. Can you talk about that sort of that idea that the taxpayers are paying for things, not the politicians? The taxpayers are in charge, not the politicians, and how important that is for you?
Well, at the end of the day, the city of Calgary is a $5 billion corporation, and we are the shareholders. And that's, I think, how it has to be looked at. And how do we want our tax dollars spent? What's important to us? And who's representing us? You've got 14 councillors that are essentially board of directors of a $5 billion corporation of the city of Calgary. And if you look at it like that, well, then you are 100%, responsible to the taxpayer, to the shareholders. And if you have that sort of maybe business mentality, it makes a lot of sense. And at the end of the day, are you spending money and are you doing what's best for the shareholder, for the voter, for the people in Ward 12? And that every counselor should be asking that question. Am I serving my constituency? Because essentially when I'm door knocking, when I'm giving my literature, when I'm talking, it is a job interview.
Mhm.
Every single night, every single door I go to, it is another job interview. And the voter is, the employer. And I think that if we I think maybe some people have lost focus of that. And I think we need to just be reminded again that, the counselor's number one job is to listen to the constituency and vote accordingly. Maybe over the last 4 years, there's been maybe an agenda and maybe other things that have been pushed and going on, and I can tell you that Ward 12 is not putting up with it anymore. They just really want to be represented, and I think that is the number one goal of a city councilor. That's their job, is to represent first, and that's my commitment.
Now, you said like the sort of will of the people will trump your personal opinions on matters. If there's like a strong calling for something, even if it's not necessarily something you advocate for, your job is to advocate for those people. How do you get a sense of that when you're in council? Because often there's a disconnect between once they're elected, sure they're door knocking, they're shaking hands, they're speaking to what people are talking about. Then once they get elected, they just kind of sit in office and then maybe win a few elections because their name is recognizable. How do you continue to hear from the people and ensure that you're representing their wishes?
Well, you have to call people back. I think that's really important, is that you maintain that connection. I think that not just in election year, I think a city councilor should be door knocking throughout their whole term. I think
Mhm.
any politician should actually, because how do you know what people are saying if you're not at their door listening to them? And another way would be community meetings and involvement that way. I think it's key that you just maintain an attitude of listening and trying to do what's best for what the majority of people are saying. There's a lot of issues I could bring up in regards to that. Like, for example, and you might even go down the road, but the blanket rezoning controversy.
Mhm.
Okay. Um, you know, I don't think it was just as popular. I mean, it was very unpopular, and Calgarians, voted, overwhelmingly they didn't want any part of it. But you had Ward 12 that was probably, over 70% against it, and
Yeah.
the current councillor voted for it anyways. And that's a big problem. So in a two part: one, because Ward 12 doesn't want blanket rezoning, and two, uh, it just shows that city council's not listening. And I think that's the biggest frustration, is people could say, well, they do say this to me, how could so many Calgarians be against this, but you still vote that way anyways?
Mhm.
And it's unacceptable. And you're missing point of the very first obligation that you have.
How do you draw that line, though? Obviously, like in hearing back from the community, one of the issues is sort of squeaky wheel activists might exasperate the degree to which a community is concerned about something. How do you sort of sort through that? Because I think lots of activists are having pressure. Well, maybe not lots. A loud minority is having an undue influence on city council.
Mhm.
Obviously, some of these issues, environmental issues, progressive issues, city council is on board with certain members. But how do you sort of sort the wheat from the chaff when it comes to what people in the community are actually concerned about?
Well, one thing that I did, and this actually really created my policies for my
Hmm.
campaign, is I did a survey. I've been doing a survey for months. I've got thousands of people that have took part in my online survey, and then also I take a lot of data at the door, and also through our social media. But I have a detailed plan on my website, which is clever, I gotta say. I like Mike.ca.
That's a good
It's
one.
it's probably one of the best ones. I know I'm biased, but and what I did is I've got the hard data. So
Yeah.
when I am gonna vote a certain way, or I'm gonna, it's because I actually have the data. And I
Mhm.
don't know if any other candidates have done that, but I have the data to back up why I'm doing what I'm doing and the direction I'm going. And really it's because the voter is telling me, not the other way around.
Mhm.
And I actually have the survey data to prove it.
I have some of the points from that survey data that I'd love to discuss. Before that, though, I think folks would love to know, um, this idea that you represent the people and that you'll bring their voice forward matters. But people also want to know who they're voting for. So, like, what are your priorities? Are you a conservative? I mean, this area is a conservative stronghold federally and provincially, even as other parts of the city start to go orange or red or whatever they may be doing. Are you a conservative candidate first and foremost?
I am the conservative candidate. I am the candidate that's owned that word. I've got, I've always had blue running through my blood. I believe that conservative values are the best way to govern society. It's the best way to raise a family. And I'm not just saying this in an election year. It really is who I am. And I've had lots of involvement and volunteer work, with the federal conservatives and the UCP. And um, but at the end of the day, I just think that you know accountability, good governance is really important. And I'm actually the only candidate that has conservative right on their signs. I've got on all my literature, because sometimes when you see the term common sense candidate, sometimes it's a trigger for it's kind of a light liberal sort of thing to say.
Yeah.
Unlike that, I'm not ashamed. I
Yeah.
I am a conservative.
Yeah.
And I think that if we institute more of the values and focus on what's really important, at the municipal level, we'll get a better value for Calgarian taxpayers.
What does that word mean to you, like in a nutshell, conservative? What is a conservative?
I think we believe in you know better accountability on spending, which can lower taxes. I think more money in our pockets right now is really important. That's the number one concern that gets brought up to me is affordability and high taxes.
Hmm.
And it's not that myself, or others are allergic to taxes. You just got to see a value for it.
Right.
As somebody that is in the construction industry, like when I pay for something, when I need to get something in return, a return on my investment. And I think that's what Calgarians are looking for, a better return. And that is a conservative value. Accountability is a conservative value. People want to know, like, where's my money going? How could I be paying 6 to 10% more property tax every year, and nothing seems to improve? And thousands of people have said that to me. And you look around, is there less potholes? Is there enough police? We're short several fire stations. The list goes on and on and on. Well, something has to give eventually.
Hmm.
And this is why guys like me are who have some experience, in their field are stepping up and saying, you know what, I think I can do a better job, and I think I can, move the needle more toward, you know, and I will say the word, the common sense side,
Hmm.
which is essentially just focus in your lane. The city of Calgary, I think they just need to just get realigned with what the important municipal issues are, and then focus the spending that way.
Let's get into those some of those specific sort of issues, and I know you touched on it there, but first and foremost, this property tax issue. I
Yeah.
mean, they're skyrocketing every year, and as that's happening, we're seeing the roads deteriorate, infrastructure deteriorate. They've dropped garbage to every 2 weeks. Like it just seems like the costs are going up, and everything is getting worse. How do you strike that balance to increase the services, or at least maintain services, not cut services,
Mhm.
without skyrocketing costs as far as taxpayer property taxes?
Well, it's just reallocating the money to where it needs to be and not where it doesn't. There's a lot of wasted money that the city, for example, here's just an example. It came out, I don't know, maybe 4 months ago. Um, the Canadian Taxpayer Federation, okay, gave Calgary an award for being the most wasteful major city in Canada because we had a hotline. It was something like, maybe 60 to $100,000 hotline that you can call and you can listen to the Bow River. That's a complete waste of money, and
Yeah.
people can't even believe like that the city would even do that. But I think that is an example of where the priorities are now. But Calgarians is saying we want it over here.
Yeah. Now, the other sort of thing that you talked about, and this obviously speaks to your business background, but sort of an organizational review,
Yeah.
zero-based budgeting, some of these sort of terms. What does that mean? Because obviously there's a lot of bloat. Usually when you see a city grow, yes, staff has to grow to accommodate that, but it becomes more efficient. You need less people per thousand people, per 100,000 people. It's not like a 1-to-1 ratio compared to a small town. We've almost had the opposite, where the bureaucracy is growing faster than the city is.
Mhm.
How do you address that, and how much would that help with costs?
Well, I think it's key to get an organizational review done. I think from an outside source, to come in and just really ascertain where we can find you know sensible cost savings.
Yeah.
This is not about cutting jobs. It's not about nothing of that. There's just a lot of areas though that we can improve on, and I think it has to be identified from outside source. That's the key.
Right.
The city, I don't think is going to identify. Administration is not going to identify it themselves. And so when you have that data, then you can really start deep diving into things and really making things more efficient. That's what it's about. If we want better value, we need to get the efficiency and the spending under control, you know, because one thing I'm pushing for is a 4-year tax freeze. There's no reason. I mean, for example, there was a $221 million surplus. That means Calgarians were overtaxed $221 million. The simple math when it's broken down is every 18 million is about 1%. So if you do the math, 221 million, that's like 12%.
Yeah.
So that's a 12% property tax hike essentially that we received that we didn't have to.
Right.
So when you just see examples like this all the time, there's definitely a better way to just spend money on our core services and just align that. And in our just on our surplus alone. And you know what? When the current Gondak and the current when they're asked, are you going to give that back to Calgarians? The answer is no.
Yeah.
That's our money.
Yeah.
Like at least, okay, if you wanted to keep it, at least give us a credit next year. There's got to be some way that you can give us a reduction, because everybody's feeling the pinch right now. And if we don't start, acting accordingly, we are gonna help create or exacerbate the problem that already exists, which is, people struggle right now to get by, ends meet. The cost of groceries, everything is just so high right now. If you got kids, there's a lot in
Mhm.
Ward 12. There's a lot of families. There's a lot of children, and children. I love my kids. I support the family unit, and but it's not cheap.
No.
And you know what? So the city of Calgary needs to help Calgarians, needs to listen to them. Okay, well, let's do a tax reduction. We have to, but I'm pushing for sure a 4-year freeze. There's no reason why we can't still do everything and freeze taxes, but I actually want to do better than that.
Now, let's talk about this consolidated sort of pension issue. I
Yeah.
mean, there's a report recently that the pensions coming out of the city of Calgary are among the highest, and that's a major problem. How do you address that? I mean, obviously, these people have worked under these terms where they're securing multiple pensions and they kind of plan on it. Obviously, though, something's not quite right with what's going on there. How do you fairly address that?
Well, I don't think anybody has a problem with one pension,
Yeah.
right? I mean,
No.
you work hard, you pay into something. I think you should get the reward of that.
Yeah.
I think where people start having a problem, myself included, is when you get two pensions or even three pensions.
Hmm.
Why, the mayor has that ability to get multiple pensions. It's not right. And I think we need to realign that with what most Calgarians are feeling and what they get.
Hmm.
I don't know anybody that gets two or three pensions, except for, our elected officials.
Yeah.
And I think that, that needs to change. And, it shouldn't be council giving themselves raises or, mayors, there needs to be a more accountable way to do things where you're not, voting to benefit yourself. And I think that, and correct me if I'm wrong here, but I'm pretty sure that the City of Calgary mayor is the only mayor in Canada that makes more than the premier. And that is crazy.
Absolutely. Yeah.
That needs to be changed. It's not right. And, I mean, I'm sure if you're that person, you think it's great, right? Because everybody wants to make money, but uh, not the average person that's struggling is not okay with that.
Right.
And you know what? If we truly want to represent the average Calgarian, then that needs to be come in line with at least comparable cities in Canada.
Yeah.
You know, what is Montreal doing? Like what is some comparable size cities? What are their mayors making versus the premier? And there has to be some kind of
Hmm.
fiscal sanity brought back here.
Yeah. Now, the one other sort of financial question I had, and this is probably the source of arguably the most corruption, the most, some would call it money laundering that takes place federally, provincially, right across the board, though. But like sort of sole source contracting, we've seen like Arrive scams where there's like millions of dollars allocated to virtually non existent companies.
Yeah.
Friends without contract competition, without transparency, are being just awarded massive contracts. It's day after day after day. Surely that's happening in Calgary. I think it's a pretty safe assumption. Not making any specific allegations, but it's probably a pretty safe bet. How critical is it to get rid of that and have a very transparent, open competition system for all contracts?
Well, it's one of my campaign promises. I mean, you know what? In business, I think you have to do things fairly. If you even in commercial construction, in my background, if you win something fairly, where it's apples to apples and everybody has the same, then it's a fair win, and I think everybody's okay with that. Even if you lose a project because you're not competitive enough, at least you know that the playing field was fair,
Mhm.
and it needs to be. And especially now you brought, there's just so much cloudiness with what's right, what's wrong, who's benefiting for what, sole source contracts, all this kind
Mhm.
of stuff. I mean, Calgary does need to review their procedures on procurement and make sure that this can't happen. And if they haven't already, and I mean, I also won't give any specifics here, but I think that, especially now in the climate, it's so important that transparency is clear. And I would be okay even with certain size projects. even there to be an ability for people to access certain amount of information, when it comes to certain dollar values,
Right.
especially when it's taxpayer money.
Yeah.
So City of Calgary money that goes to a certain project, who wins it. And I know that there's a little bit of proprietary and there, but I always think that more information is better.
Right.
Less in-camera meetings, which means secret meetings.
Yeah.
I mean, this is another problem, which is part of the greater issue is, nobody believes politicians anymore. Everybody thinks that they got their best interest in mind, and they act accordingly. And so having, I think we need a reduction of in-camera meetings in city council. And again, that's the secret meetings that they hold. There's a lot of them,
Mm.
and I think that I think if a lot of these conversations happened in public,
Mm.
people might vote a different way,
Right.
and it's like, and I think that's would probably help with the whole accountability thing,
Right.
and so that's one thing that I'm gonna push for.
If people want to find sort of all your policy promises, they can find those a handy PDF on your website. But I do want to ask you first and foremost about one of the other sort of issues before we wrap up here, and that is safety and crime. Obviously, when you think about this, most people think, well, maybe that's like a downtown issue, but break-ins are on the rise, vandalism, even car thefts on the rise, especially in these communities. I mean, it's shocking for folks who grew up in sort of South Calgary to think that this would be commonplace, but it is. How do you sort of address that? Even with, I mean, concerns about transit, an LRT train station will be coming down here. That
Yes.
gives a certain sort of subset of criminality access, easier access to this area. How do you address that? What's the process for making this area safe again, so you can feel free to let your kids out and not be concerned about that?
We need more police.
Yeah.
This idea that defunding the police is a solution, it's not. If you want more faster response times, then you need more police officers and you need more equipment. And so, that's number two that gets brought up to me at the doors
Mm.
is affordability, taxes, and number two is public safety. I mean, let me give you an example. So Cranston, okay, is one of the far south communities, very large community in Ward 12, and there's video doorbell footage that has been shared on some of the community pages of individuals going and checking on doors to see at front doors if they're locked at 1:30 in the morning.
Hmm.
They're all masked up, they've got hoodie on and everything, and that's pretty scary because their intention is obviously to break in, right? And so the doorbell bell camera caught
Yeah.
them trying. It was locked, and they went to another home.
Yeah.
Well, that is pretty scary because now that kind of stuff is happening in what some people would have considered a safe suburb. And I mean, maybe it's attached to the greater problem of our economy and jobs, and Calgary's definitely not booming the way it used to be. And but so Calgarians are saying we want public safety as a top priority, and that's what I'm going to push. And the police, the frontline police, have my commitment, and fire. Because you got to understand, even the fire department responds not only to fire,
Yeah.
but almost all the medical emergencies too. And usually they're the first ones on the scene. And they get we need a lot more fire stations in Calgary too here. So I think when it comes to public safety, there's just no question. You have to make it a priority, and you got to find the money to do it.
So, final question here for you. I don't know if there's a specific policy we didn't touch on you want to get to. Obviously, folks can find that on your website. But what's your sort of final call to folks out there who may be on the fence, set to vote in the next
Sure.
week? What's your pitch to them if they're in Ward 12? Why they should vote for you?
Well, I think that I have the most relevant experience, to be the best city councilor that I can be. With a construction background and a project management background and budgeting background, I think that these are some of the skills that can help really drive more resources and support for Ward 12. I'm also not afraid to speak. So what constituents want is what I'm going to say, and I'm going to advocate for that. Um, as we near the final stretch here, if you support me, I please, I'll say get a hold of me through the website or my social media. If you'd like to get involved, there's 3 ways you can help. It's with your time, it's with your energy, and yes, it's with donations, because running an election is pretty expensive.
Hmm.
And but you know what? As we're in the final stretch, I just encourage people to check out my website at ElectionsCalgary.ca. It has my campaign video, and it has my full PDF of all my policies. But if you want to know what I've been doing the last almost 10 months now, I have been at this the longest, and I was the first one registered. So the best is to check out my Facebook at Mike Jamieson for Ward 12. And it just has a ton of information, videos, and it showed my community involvement from the very beginning and how, basically up to right now. And I gotta say one thing, it's pretty cool. So I posted a video yesterday. I got contacted by a guy named Mike Jamieson who lives in Cranston. So I was very curious. I'm like, okay, I got to go see this guy. He's got the same name as me. So we went and recorded a video together, and he was being congratulated, at all the events that he went to and in the community. Hey, good job, Mike, for putting your hat in the ring. And he's like, I'm not running for city council. And then, he checked out my platform. He's like, I really like this. So he contacted, I came and we did a little video, and it was like, I'm Mike Jamieson and I'm running. And then he said, I'm Mike Jamieson, but I'm not running. And he said, but I am throwing my support behind Mike. And, it's those funny interactions that are very encouraging. And I'll leave it at that because that is the response that I've been getting, the whole time. And, there's a lot of support, and because I think people just really, they want to change, but they really want Calgary to start listening again and focusing on our municipal issues more.
So Mike Jamieson endorses Mike Jamieson.
Correct.
Mike, thank you so much for your time. And folks out there, the municipal election is looming. Don't be apathetic. I know we talk a lot about federal and provincial politics and issues, but so many aspects of your day-to-day life are grounded in those municipal issues. So do show up. Thanks so much for tuning in.